Hello viewers, welcome to my YouTube channel. Get ready for heart-touching stories. Don't forget to subscribe and let's begin.
I was 23 years old and living in a one-bedroom apartment with a broken radiator, surviving on instant noodles and the modest salary from my job at a local bookshop when my grandfather died. Grandpa Leo wasn't the kind of man you'd look at and think millionaire. He wore the same canvas fishing hat for 30 years. He drove a 1994 Ford pickup that leaked oil on every driveway it ever sat in. He grew tomatoes in his backyard and gave them to his neighbors in paper bags with little handwritten notes tucked inside. For the Garcias, with love, or these ones are sweet, I promise. He lived in the same modest house in Clement County that he'd bought in 1971 for $42,000, a house with a creaky porch and curtains my grandmother had sewn herself before she passed. Nobody knew about the money. Not really. We knew Grandpa Leo was comfortable, in the way that old men who never spend anything eventually become comfortable. He'd worked 40 years as a civil engineer, lived below his means every single day, and invested quietly and consistently since before my parents were born. But $5 million, nobody had any idea. Not my father, not my mother, not my Aunt Rosanna, who called herself the family's unofficial treasurer, because she once made a spreadsheet for Christmas dinner costs. I found out the same way everyone else did at the reading of the will, on a gray Tuesday morning in a lawyer's office that smelled like old paper and wood polish, 3 weeks after we'd buried him. The lawyer's name was Mr. Beaumont. He was a thin man in his late 60s with silver hair and the kind of careful eyes that never quite land on yours for too long. He'd been Grandpa Leo's attorney for over 20 years. He sat behind a wide oak desk and folded his hands and told us with practiced calm that the estate was valued at approximately $5.2 million. My mother made a sound like a small animal stepping on something sharp. My father sat up straighter in his chair. Aunt Rosanna said, "I'm sorry, what, Mr. Beaumont continued reading. The house, valued at roughly $800,000 in the current market, would go to my father, Elio's only son, along with a personal vehicle and the contents of the property. A charitable bequest of $100,000 was directed to the Clement County Public Library System. Grandpa Leo had loved books. Specific items, his watch, his fishing rods, a set of Italian cookbooks, were designated for particular people. And then there was the matter of the primary financial estate. Mr. Beaumont looked up from the document for just a moment before he continued reading. Remainder of the liquid estate, totaling $5,040,000, is bequeathed in full to my granddaughter Marina Cecilia Voss. That's me. The room went absolutely silent. I don't know exactly how to describe what happened next, because it happened so fast and so slowly at the same time, the way bad things always seem to. My father's face went through several colors. My mother's jaw tightened into something I recognized, the prelude to a very long, very quiet anger. Aunt Rosanna looked at me like I had done something to her personally, like I had reached into her pocket and taken something that belonged there. Nobody congratulated me. Mr. Beaumont, to his credit, continued with professional detachment. He explained that a cashier's check had been prepared as per the estate's instructions, made out in my name to be issued through the estate's bank. He explained the process for transfer, the tax considerations, the timeline. He handed me a sealed envelope with information I would need. My father asked very quietly if there was any room for reinterpretation. Mr. Beaumont said there was not. The will was clear, unambiguous, and had been prepared with full legal rigor 18 months prior. Grandpa Leo had been, by every measure of sound mind and deliberate intention. We drove home together in my parents' car because I had ridden with them that morning. It was the longest 40-minute drive of my life. Nobody spoke for the first 20 minutes. Then my mother said carefully that obviously Grandpa had made this decision when he and I were particularly close, and that perhaps it would be fair, the right thing to do, to consider the family as a whole when deciding how to handle the money. I said I would think about it. That was my first mistake. Not because thinking was wrong, but because they heard yes. The check arrived by certified mail 11 days later. It was a real cashier's check, printed on heavy paper with the bank's watermark filled out in clean black ink. My name, $5,040,000. I held it in my hands for a long time, standing in my kitchen in my socks next to the radiator that still didn't work. I put it on the kitchen table and made coffee and sat with it for a while. Then I called my mother to tell her it had arrived. That was my second mistake. She and my father were at my apartment within the hour. I don't know what I expected, some acknowledgement of the gravity of the moment maybe. Some warmth. My mother brought a coffee cake, which in retrospect was her version of softening the ground before she started digging. They sat at my kitchen table and my father picked up the check and looked at it for a long moment. Then he set it down and folded his hands and told me calmly and methodically why it made more sense to pool the inheritance as a family asset. He had a plan. He'd clearly been working on it for 11 days. There was talk of a family investment account, of a business venture he'd been considering for years, of how I was young and didn't understand money management and how $5 million could disappear very quickly if handled without experience. My mother talked about fairness. about how my Aunt Rosanna was also grieving, also family, also deserving of consideration. About how Grandpa Elio had probably intended the money to support everyone, not just me. I sat and listened and felt something go very quiet inside me. When my father finished talking, he reached out and picked up the check again. He looked at it. Then he looked at my mother. And then, before I fully understood what was happening, he tore it in half. He set the two pieces back on the table. "Now it's settled," he said. "We'll contact the bank tomorrow and discuss a proper reissuance to a joint family account. That's the right way to handle this." My mother nodded. My father stood up, straightened his jacket, and they left. I sat at the table with two pieces of paper in front of me and the taste of something cold at the back of my throat. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark and thought about Grandpa Leo, about his canvas fishing hat, about the way he used to sit with me on his porch when I was small, pointing out the names of the stars he knew and making up names for the ones he didn't. About how he'd come to every single one of my school events, not just the big ones, but the small, forgettable ones that my parents sometimes skipped because they had other things going on. About how, when I was 16 and going through the worst year of my adolescence, he was the one who drove 40 minutes to pick me up from a party when I called him, no questions asked, and bought me pancakes at a diner at 1 a.m. and just talked to me about his life until I felt like myself again. He'd chosen me, deliberately. 18 months before he died, he had sat with Mr. Beaumont and made a decision and signed his name. I thought about what my father had said. Now it's settled. Something in me decided very quietly that it was not settled at all. The next morning I called Mr. Beaumont before 8 o'clock. He was already in his office. When I explained what had happened, that my father had torn the check, he was quiet for a moment. Then he told me in his careful way not to worry. A cashier's check being physically destroyed did not invalidate the underlying legal obligation of the estate. The funds were still mine, held in trust by the estate's bank. The check was an instrument, not the asset itself. He advised me to contact the bank directly and to come in as soon as possible with my identification and a copy of the will. He also said, gently but clearly, "Your grandfather anticipated certain possibilities, Marina. He was a thorough man. I'd encourage you to come by my office as well. There is an additional letter he left, which I was instructed to give you only after the check had been issued." I asked why he hadn't given it to me at the reading. Because Mr. Beaumont said those were his instructions. He was, as I said, a thorough man. I went to the bank first. I didn't go to my parents' bank, the one my father had mentioned where he planned to establish the joint account. I went to the estate's bank downtown, a place I'd only ever driven past. I asked to speak with a manager. The manager's name was Diane Ockhaffer, and she was the kind of person who made you feel within 30 seconds of meeting her that everything was going to be handled correctly. She sat with me in a glass-walled office and reviewed my documents, the copy of the will, my identification, the letter from Mr. Beaumont confirming the check issuance. She told me that the funds were intact and that the destroyed check was a non-issue. She told me that reissuance was a straightforward process. She also told me something that made me sit back in my chair. "Need to let you know," Diane said, "that we received a call this morning. A man identifying himself as your father contacted the bank and indicated that you would be requesting a reissuance, and that any such reissuance should be redirected to a joint account that he was in the process of establishing." She folded her hands. "I am telling you this because the account he described does not exist, the request had no legal standing, and because you are the named beneficiary of this estate. I am also telling you because I want to be transparent about what was attempted." She paused. "The funds are yours, Marina. They have always been yours. What would you like to do?" I took a breath. "I'd like to open a new account," I said. "In my name only, Mr. Beaumont's letter was waiting for me when I went to his office that afternoon. It was handwritten on 2 pages of cream-colored stationery in my grandfather's careful, slightly slanted script. "I won't share all of it, some of it is too private, too much just mine. But I'll share the part that I've thought about almost every day since. Marina," he wrote, "if you're reading this, then the check has been issued and whatever followed, followed. I know my son, I love him, but I know him. And I know that money has a way of making people into versions of themselves they would not otherwise choose to be. I chose you not to punish anyone, but because I watched you all your life and I saw someone who would carry this carefully. You never asked me for anything. You never treated me like a resource. You sat with me and you listened to me, and when your grandmother was dying, you were the one who read to her. This money is not a reward, it is a responsibility. I trust you with it because you are the only one I watched and thought, she will use this to build something good. Don't let anyone take it. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for receiving what was given freely. And don't close your heart to your family, but know the difference between family and obligation. With all my love, Grandpa Elijo." I did not give my parents any of the money. I want to be honest about that, because I think some part of you reading this expected a resolution where I split it generously and everyone hugged and everything was fine. That didn't happen. My father and I did not speak for almost a year. My mother called periodically, conversations that were civil and careful and never quite honest. Aunt Rosanna sent an email I chose not to respond to. What I did with the money: I paid off my student loans. I helped a close friend start a business. I set up a modest scholarship at the Clement County Public Library System, an extension of Grandpa's own bequest, for young people pursuing education in the sciences and the arts. I bought a small apartment, nothing extravagant, with a radiator that works perfectly. I set the majority of it aside, carefully managed, for a future I'm still in the process of building. My father and I eventually found our way back to something not what we were, but something honest. I went to dinner at my parents' house last Thanksgiving. We didn't talk about the money or the check or the phone call to the bank. We talked about ordinary things. My mother made her roast chicken. My father told a story from his childhood that I'd never heard before about a time he got lost in the woods near his father's house and Grandpa Leo had found him at dusk, calm as anything, carrying a flashlight and his fishing hat. They sat together in that kitchen and I thought they loved him too. They just didn't know how to do it without wanting something back. On the anniversary of his death, I drove out to Clement County. I sat on the porch of his old house, my parents' house now, technically because they weren't home, and I just sat there in the afternoon quiet with my hands in my lap. I thought about a man who wore the same hat for 30 years and wrote little notes to his neighbors, and saved quietly for decades and made one deliberate, careful decision near the end of his life. I thought about how well he had known me, how from wherever he was he had reached across the distance and said, "I see you, I trust you." Here, the tomato plants in the side yard had gone unattended and overgrown. I made a note to come back in the spring and tend to them. It felt like the least I could do.